Hi guys, my name is Sophie Sprocket and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about a very interesting topic, which is travel anxiety and solo traveling. So let's jump in. So a question that's been popping up time and time again recently, and I've especially had a few emails about this, is effectively, do you ever get afraid traveling by yourself on the road? And if so, how do you kind of combat those negative emotions? And I thought that this would be a really good opportunity to kind of discuss with you guys what goes through my head before a trip, and also, what steps I take to kind of run through any emotions that I'm experiencing. So without further ado, let's jump straight in. Fear comes in a variety of different circumstances. And one of the most common ones I tend to find when speaking to bikers is fear of an accident, and also the fear of traveling alone. It tends to be quite a common issue. So if you are currently feeling like you'd like to do more traveling, but you're a little bit scared of doing so, do rest assured that you're not the only one. Surprisingly, a lot of bikers actually suffer with the same issue. And what I will say is that I certainly felt the same way when I first started traveling. But for me, there was definitely a pinnacle point where I went from being constantly anxious and scared about doing these trips to feeling a little bit more confident in my skills and my abilities. And I guess we're going to kind of look at that particular transition point for how I became the traveler that I am today. Step number 1, understanding your fear. The first way into overcoming fear is to first understand specifically what it is that you're afraid of. Are you afraid of not knowing where you're going? Are you afraid of breaking down? Are you afraid of crashing? You need to break it down into tangible issues. And you might have more than one, and that's totally fine. But when you sit down and you start making a list and start trying to break down specifically what it is, the things that are causing you anxiety, at this point you can then begin to address it. So let's take the example that, you are afraid of not knowing where you're going. You can make these decisions beforehand. That's completely fine. There's no set way to enjoy traveling. Every way of doing it is completely valid. And if there's one particular step that will help decrease your anxiety on the road, why would you not engage with it? Even if other people think it's not traditional touring, if it's getting you on the road, as far as I'm concerned, it's a perfectly valid method of traveling. So for me, when I first started traveling by myself, my biggest fear was that I didn't know where I'd be sleeping that night, and I didn't know if where I'd be sleeping would be safe. And they were the main issues that were holding me back from traveling. I didn't mind the traveling so much. I didn't mind getting lost. I was just afraid to basically be asleep in a vulnerable area. That was my biggest fear. And so when I started breaking down specifically what was making me feel afraid, one of the issues was that I was identifiable on the road. So I started looking at tents that would effectively hide my bike. Another one was that I didn't know if an area was safe. So then I would start to resort to campsites where I knew there was like 24-hour guards on site. And then eventually, as the more I continued to do this, the more my confidence started to grow, and the more that my anxiety started to decrease. Because ultimately anxiety decreases the more times you start to do an activity. It eventually just becomes a normal thing for you to do. But if there's steps that you can take in the meantime to get you to kind of move on with those actions, move on with the touring and move on with the camping, but still kind of ease those fears, why not do it? Why not gradually introduce yourself into an environment that ultimately, you will have confidence, and you just don't have confidence now. So baby steps. That's that's the biggest thing I can recommend for overcoming anxiety. Step number 2, preparing yourself mentally and emotionally for a trip. So if you are someone who really wants to start solo traveling, but you do feel nervous and you are anxious and those feelings are existing inside of you, one of the tips that I used to do early in the beginning was that I would do quite a lot of research about the area that I was going to. I would make kind of like a rough guide of various different things that I could go and see, and just generally mentally prepare myself for the area that I was going in. And you can kind of see this in some of my earlier videos where I used to kind of make these really cute like little biker guides to various different areas that I was going to. Now, these motorcycle guides were a result of my desire to kind of mentally and emotionally prepare myself for the areas that I was going to. And in order to do that, I would do a little bit of research about where I was going. I also think that doing a little bit of research helps you determine what you want to accomplish from this trip. So whenever I go out on the road, I always try to set myself like a little bit of a goal, a little bit of a task to achieve. Like, again, you can see this in some of my earlier travel videos. For example, when I went to the Lake District, my goal was to go over Hard Knot Pass. When I went to Wales, one of my goals was to go purchase milkshakes. Another goal was that I wanted to ride up a particular hill. And by having these goals set in place before you go to an area, or having just like a little bit of a rough idea, it gives you a sense of accomplishment when you come back. Although, word of warning, if you've watched my steepest hill darkest day video, you'll know that sometimes when you can set a goal and you don't accomplish it, it does make you feel worse. So be realistic with the goals, otherwise you're going to make yourself even more anxious when it comes to traveling. Pick something achievable and something that would make you feel good for ultimately doing. So yeah, that's my little word of warning there. Step number 3 is consider all of the logistics of your trip before you go. I personally, I'm a big advocate of when you start touring, if you're like, it's your first time touring, I am a huge advocate of overpacking. And I know for a fact, from experience, there's a lot of stuff you won't need, 100%. But simply carrying that around makes you feel secure. And ultimately, overcoming anxiety on the road is all about feeling secure, because 90% of the time, you're probably not in any danger. But if you feel like you are, it's not good for traveling. So if you want to take the first aid kit, take it. If you want to take emergency Red Bulls, take it. If you want to have a campfire and 20 kilos of meat, so you definitely have enough food for 24 hours, take it. Like, don't let anyone tell you otherwise. You might not need the kitchen sink. It's true, you might not need the kitchen sink. But ultimately, if that makes you feel more secure on the road, do it. And a classic example of this is me with my hot water bottles. No matter where I travel, I have like a 4-season sleeping bag. No matter where I travel, I will always take a hot water bottle, and I don't need it. I don't need it, but it makes me feel more secure. And ultimately, if you're feeling more secure on the road, you're gonna have a better time. So, you know, think about all the different things you might need, think about the logistics of the trip, kind of have like a rough idea of where you're gonna go, what kind of equipment you'll need. And all of this sense of planning is gonna, you know, it's gonna ease your troubles on the road. And I think that part of the reason that this is such an effective coping strategy is that when you're on the road, part of the anxiety develops from the fear of unknown. So if you're packing for all kind of circumstances, ultimately, you kind of erase that fear of the unknown. You're like, well, I know that this can go wrong. I know that this can go wrong. And I have this, and this to kind of deal with that scenario if it arises. And I don't think that's a bad thing. And I know that a lot of people have often slated that I used to overpack in the beginning. Obviously, I'm a lot better now that I'm a lot more confident myself, but I used to, you know, a lot of people used to comment on the fact that I would take everything on my motorbike. But that's what helped me travel. And if I removed all of that stuff and I didn't feel secure on the road, I wouldn't be traveling. So ultimately, if it gets you to do what you want to achieve, it's the right thing to do for you. Tip number 4, don't be afraid to ask for help. Now, what do I mean by asking for help? Now, asking for help can come in a variety of different ways. It can be help with your pre-checklists for traveling. It can be help with planning a route. It can be help with accommodation on the road. It can also be help when you are on the road. Maybe it's the case your bike breaks down and you need some assistance recovering it. Maybe it's the case that your bike breaks down and you don't need assistance recovering it, but you do need some garage help. You know, ask like some local bikers. And there's loads of different ways that you can ask for help. But often I tend to find that when people are feeling very anxious, they don't really think about asking for help. They kind of go into a full panic mode. Speaking from experience. But a lot of people, the vast majority of the time, are actually really extremely helpful and they want to help. Obviously, there's like a few odd people who just don't. But in my experience, the vast majority, especially if you like rocked up to like a biker cafe or like a well-known biker hotel or like pub, the vast majority of people will want to help you. So tip number 5, it's effectively just be patient with yourself. And the reason I recommend being patient with yourself is because although I've not done some amazing, insane long trips, what I have learned over the last 18 months is that when it comes to motorcycle touring, you learn just as much about your capacity as a biker and about who you are as a person from the situations where you fail than when you're successful, if not more. And when I think back to all of the trips where things went wrong and things were a disaster and I felt frustrated and angry at myself, and I look back at those experiences and I think, look at how much more I learned from being in that situation than when things went perfectly smoothly. Like when I did achieve my goal, what did I really learn from that? Not a lot. I learned that, okay, it was a good trip, I planned well, but when things went wrong, it would spur me on in the right direction to learn more. And then inevitably those better trips do happen. But if you expect yourself to be perfect from the get-go, you miss out on that opportunity to be a better person. So be patient with yourself. Realize that it's a journey in more than one different ways. Accept where you are, embrace your capacity as a biker, and just enjoy it. You only ever get to learn something once in your life. Once you've learned that skill, once you've learned how to do it, you don't get to learn it again. And learning's a lot of fun. So take your time, embrace it, and just enjoy it effectively. So there we have it. Traveling on a motorcycle is a lot of fun, but it can also cause a little bit of anxiety. And if you're new to traveling and you want to start getting into motorcycle touring, but you are finding yourself with a little bit of anxiety about going on the road, especially if you're going by yourself, don't worry about it. I know it's easier said than done, but how you're feeling and the emotions that you're going through, the sense of fear that you have, we all have had it. We've all been there. We've all had the pre-trip nerves and scariness and just the anxiety. And to be honest, most of us still do. I still get nervous before a trip. The night before I leave, I'm awake a little bit longer than I should be, and I'll be lying in bed and I will be feeling anxious and I will be feeling nervous. And these aren't bad emotions to have. Emotions are a lot of fun. They make life a lot of fun. Just embrace that you have them and roll with them anyway. It's not something you want to get rid of. It's just something you want to be aware of, and it's something you want to recognize exists in yourself, but also you want to make sure they don't hold you back when you're touring. And while I kind of recognize that a lot of the places that I'm going to are quite safe for touring anyway, and while I also recognize that I'm probably not doing the same kind of distances as the professionals are, but what I have done is a lot of self-reflection and also just learning as a complete beginner to today. And ultimately, it helped me recognize that it's okay to be scared. It's fine. It's normal. You're doing a good job, and you need to remember that. And any trip, whether it's a day trip, whether it's an overnight trip, whether you're staying in a hotel, whether you're staying in a tent, whether you give up at 2 a.m. in the morning and you go home, every trip is a success because you tried it in the first place. And whether you ultimately accomplish those goals or not, you still put yourself in a situation where you're afraid and you still try to push through on that fear. And whether you manage to successfully push through on your fear or not, you're still doing a good job, and you just need to remember that. And yeah, that's my word of wisdom. So there we go. Now, if you guys would like to see more great travel content, don't forget to hit subscribe. I produce new videos every single Sunday at 6 p.m. Until next week, my name's Safi Sprocket, signing off.